Hello everyone and welcome back to the second episode of my Node.js From Scratch series. Today we're going to be looking at adding fairly basic username and password, or in our case it'll be email, authentication using JSON web tokens. So we'll get into it. The first thing we're going to do is install a couple of libraries. So first thing we need, we'll do npm I, and we need jsonwebtoken. So this will be the library that actually creates our JSON web token. Then we need bcrypt, which is a hashing library. So we'll hash the user's password when we store it in the database. So we'll install them, and then we've got a couple of dev dependencies as well. So we'll do npm I-d, and I'm just going to copy these as usual. I did it for my last video. Which by the way we're using as a base for this. So if you haven't watched the last video, you don't have to, I guess, technically. You can just go onto my GitHub and there'll be a link to that in the description and get the Node.js From Scratch repository and download that, and we're going to be using that as the base for this. So the two packages we need are types/JSONWebToken and types/bcrypt. So as I was saying, I'll leave these in the description like I did for the last video, just to make it a bit easier, so you can just copy and paste them from the description without having to write them all out. Although in this video there are no more packages to install, so a lot less than the last video. So now that those two are installed, and I'm gonna have to go through and fix these, by the way. It doesn't look like there's too much of an issue at the moment with these. They're just warnings, but yeah, I'll have to have a look at some point. So the first thing we want to do is just edit our env files. So what JSON web tokens need in order to be able to verify that they're legit is a secret. So we can create a new entry in our .env.example. So this is just for developers that might be like pulling our code base, and just to give people an idea of what env variables they'll need. So we'll add that to .env, and this is the env that actually gets used, and we'll just call it secret, or we'll just give it the value of secret. And one thing that we need to do is add that to our validate env to make sure that it exists. So it's basically the same as like these string ones, so we'll just add a new one for string, but instead of mongo_user we'll do jwt_secret, and that's fine. So the next thing we'll do is we'll basically add all the code needed to create tokens. So the first thing we need is the interface. So tokens will have their own interface, just to let us know what's actually stored in the token, what information, because that's one of the good things about JSON web tokens is you can store information in them. So token.interface.ts. Okay, so that's going to contain the interface for token. So we'll do import schema from Mongoose. Here we go. We'll do interface token extends object, and we'll do the ID, and this is why we imported the schema, because this is going to be the user's ID, which is technically an object ID from Mongoose. So we'll do types.object ID, and then we want expires in, and then that's just going to be a number, and then we need to export that. So expires in is going to tell us when the token actually expires, so that when it gets passed through, if it's expired, we'll mark it as, well, we'll basically just won't let the user do anything on the API. We'll just say that it's unauthenticated. And what you can do with that is you can make the user re-authenticate on the front end. So if we send a request back saying like status 401 unauthenticated, your front end will say, okay, you need to re-authenticate before you can make the request. And then you can redirect them to the login page, for example. So after we've added that interface, we have another file in utils that we need to add, which is called token.ts. And this is going to have the actual functionality for verifying and creating a token. So we'll do import JWT from jsonwebtoken. Then we'll do import user. Now we don't actually have user yet. I just want to get the token functionality out of the way, and then a little bit later on we'll add all the user stuff. So we'll import user. It doesn't exist yet, but it'll be located in @/resources/user/user.interface. And then we'll do import token from utils/interfaces/token interface. And then the first thing we're going to do is create the create token function. So if we do export const create token equals, and then a user will be passed into this. So it'll be of type user, and it's going to return a string. And what we'll do is just do return jwt.sign, and then the ID will be the user's ID. So we'll do user._ID. Then we'll do process.env.jwt_secret. So the second parameter for this sign is the secret, and that it's going to be expecting the type of jwt.secret. So we'll do that now. So we just do as jwt.secret, and then the third argument is going to be some options. And for us, we're just going to use expires in, and it's sort of up to you how long you leave a token. I guess the longer you leave it, the more unsecure that is. So we're just going to do 1 day, which you can just do 1 lowercase d to represent that. So yeah, this jwt.secret is going to be expecting either a string, a buffer, or an object with these values in. For us, we're just passing in string. So next thing we'll do, export const again. This is just so that we can import them by themselves, so that we don't have to import both of these functions at once. So basically, instead of doing like import, we can basically do this. Import create token like that from, and then this file. Otherwise we would have to do like import, I don't know, token, and then do something like token.create token. So I think it just looks a lot nicer if we can import them separately. But we will also add a default export that lets us export both functions, but because of the way we're using them, we're not going to use them in the same file. Verify token gets used on our authenticated middleware, which we'll add a little bit later on. So we'll do const verify token. So this is where we actually verify that this is an actual token that we've signed and also hasn't expired. So verify token, this is going to be async, and it's going to be arrow function with the parameters of token. That's just going to be a string. Okay, and then we need to do the return type, which is going to be promise, and it's going to be either jwt.verify errors, or can't get the right one there, or it's going to be a token. All being well, it'll be a token. So we'll just do another return. It's going to be a new promise. So we're actually doing a promise here. And we'll do resolve or reject that that added an import here. Get rid of that. So inside the promise, we'll do jwt.verify, and this will accept token, the secret, so process.env.jwt_secret, and that again will be as jwt.secret, and the third parameter is a callback, and that will accept. Hang on a minute. Sorry about that. I did it as if it was an object, but it's a callback, so it's a function, error, or payload. There we go. So if it's an error, we want to return reject, and we'll put that error in that. We'll pass the error through. Or we want to resolve it with the payload as token, so that we return the correct type. And that is, looks like it's done, although it is throwing an error. I think we've missed. There we go. So there we go, reformatted. And then the last thing we'll do for this is export default, and then we'll just export both of these functions. All right, so we can use them in the sort of normal method where we use a default export, but we can also just import both of them individually, which will be quite useful for us because we don't want to use. I don't think there's going to be ever a scenario where we use verify and create in the same file, at least for us anyway. Maybe depending on how some people write their code, they might have it on the same file, but I think we're only using verify in the middleware, which we'll create in a little bit after we've created all the user logic. So yeah, still getting an error here, but that's just because we haven't created this user. So we'll do all that now. Similar to our post stuff, which you can see here, we need a new folder called user, and inside that folder we'll add all of the necessary files. So we'll do user controller.ts, user model.ts, user interface.ts, user service.ts, and something I've been thinking about is creating some kind of command line tool for this, because obviously it's quite involved having to create all of these files every time you create a resource. So that could be something I do in a future episode, looking at command line tools in our code base, but for now we'll just do it manually. First thing we'll do is create the interface. So user interface is going to import document from Mongoose, and like our post interface that we made in the last video, it's going to extend the document. So we'll do export default interface user, and it's going to extend document. So we're going to have an email, which can be a string. Oh, can't type as usual. Name, string. Password, also going to be a string. And then role. The last thing we need is a function that we'll actually be adding to the model directly, and it's called isValidPassword, and that will accept password, and that'll be a type string, and the return for that will be a promise, and it'll either be an error or a boolean, so true or false, depending on whether the authentication is successful. So now that the interface is done, we can do the model. So we'll do import schema and model, and that'll be from the Mongoose library. Import bcrypt, if I can spell it, bcrypt, there we go. from bcrypt, and then we'll import user, which we actually have now, from at resources user / user interface. All right, and we'll do a const user schema is equal to new schema. Oh, you open that. There we go. So we're going to have name. That's going to be a type string. Oh, capital letters for this type. Then required is going to be true because we want them to have a name. Then we'll do email. Type string again. Required. True. And then we've got a couple of more things for this one. So we want the email to be unique. The reason why is we're going to identify users by email. So when they log in, we're going to find the user that's trying to log in by their email. So it has to be unique. So we'll do unique true. And then the other thing we're going to do is trim. Now, I don't know how necessary this is, but trim will basically get rid of white space on the end. So I don't want the possibility of Mongoose storing, or MongoDB storing the email with white space, just in case we do a comparison and it's like, oh, this isn't the same just because there's some white space at the end. I don't know if it would do that, but I just sort of precautionary to do that. So password. Now, password's an interesting one. So the type's going to be string, as usual. Whether it's required or not is a difficult one, because if you're going to be using OAuth 2 in the future, or some kind of like authentication, like Google authentication or something like that, you probably won't be using a password. But you may also just want a password by default, so that like if they signed up with Google authentication, you may still ask them to add a password, just in case their Google authentication fails. But even then, nowadays, I think using emails for that is actually a better option. I think, I don't know what they call it, but yeah, you can basically send an email to someone's account, and then they can use that to sign in with. I think it's called like email magic link or something. So for us, we're going to leave it. We're not going to say it's required, but it's really up to you. Yeah, like I said, if you're using OAuth, you won't be storing a password. You'll be storing keys for the OAuth stuff. So yeah, that'll come down to you and what you're doing. If you're only ever going to use like username and password authentication, making it required is that would make sense. And then the last thing would be timestamps. Set that to true, and there we go. So now we just need to export this. Export default, and I've just remembered I forgot all the other functions. Hang on a minute. We'll just export it, and then we'll add those. There's a couple of functions to add before we're done with this model. So that's going to be a user, and that's going to be called user, and then we'll pass in the user schema. All right, perfect. So now there's a couple of things we need to do before we're done with this model. The first one is we need to add something that will hash the password before the user is added to the database. Now, thankfully, Mongoose provides stuff for that. So if we do user schema, I don't know if they call it hooks in Mongoose. I assume they do. There's a hook called pre, and inside of that we can target save, and I think we need to add user here so it knows what type we're dealing with. So we'll do an async function, and then we can pass in next. So this is similar to like how Express works, in the sense that next will keep going. It'll I don't know where it's going to when it does next, actually, because it's not going to another middleware. I guess it's just continuing the code. So actually, like saving the document. I assume that's what it's doing. So what we can do is we can do a check to see if the field has actually been modified. So we can do if it's modified. If it's not modified, sorry, we'll return next, which will carry on saving it to the database. Otherwise, we want to hash the password and then store the hash as a password. So we'll do await bcrypt.hash, and then we'll pass in this dot password, and then the next option is the amount of salt rounds you want it to do. Now, this is up to you. The last I heard, 10 is a good number. So we'll go with 10. Basically, the more you do, the more secure the password will be. But at the same time, the more you do, the longer it'll take to hash the password. So you sort of have to find a balance between a secure password, but then also not, taking a long time when you're and a lot of processing power hashing that password. So 10 seems to be a reasonable number. I'm not an expert on the matter, but I go with 10. You can sort of make your own mind up, maybe do some research on that if you want to. And then we'll set this dot password equals to hash, and then next, and what it'll do is it'll save this dot password. So it won't save the original password, it'll save this hash, which is good. And then one last thing, we're going to add the method that we defined in our interface. So methods dot is valid password is going to be equal to an async function, and that's going to accept password, which will be a string, and it's going to return a promise of either error or boolean. So as you can see, it's basically the exact same as how we defined it in, I'm going to put a semicolon there, in our interface, and now we're just adding it. So we'll just do quite a simple function. We just do a return await bcrypt.compare, and then what we do is we pass in the password, and then we pass in this dot password. So, like I said, I'm not an expert on the matter, but I assume what this is doing is it will... Is that fine? Okay, that is fine. It's just my spelling mistakes causing problems again. What it will do is it will accept password, it'll hash that, and then compare it to the hash that we have saved in the database. I think that's how it works, and then it compares whether they're actually the same or not. Again, I'm not an expert on the matter, but I think that's how it works. But don't you take what I say with a pinch of salt. So the next thing we'll do is add the validation stuff. So once again, like we did for posts in the last episode, validation, and we're actually going to create two validation schemas this time, one for register and one for login. So these are important just to make sure that, not only to make sure that they have exactly what they need to make the request possible to execute, but also with the validation middleware, it'll return all of the fields that aren't correct. So it's quite useful for your front end to basically for user experience, so they can see exactly what's gone wrong, which is quite good. So we'll import joy from joy, and we'll do const register is going to be equal to joy.object, and inside that object we're going to have name, and we're going to do joy.string. So now we're going to do something I haven't used yet, which is use max, and this will make it so that when something gets submitted and it has a name on it, it has to be less than 30 characters. So that's it's useful just for making sure people don't like add ridiculous length names, because you wouldn't be able to display it on your website if it's like 500 characters long. So we limit to 30 characters is fairly reasonable. Then we do email. We'll do joy.string, And then we'll do another one that we haven't used yet, which is email, and that'll check that it's actually like an actual email. I'm trying to think of what the standard is, but there's a standard for what an email, essentially what an email should look like and what it should contain, and it'll check that. Does it say it on here? To be a valid, okay, it doesn't say exactly what it checks, but it'll make sure that it's got like the @ and then the domain and stuff, and then we'll do required. And then last thing for register, we'll do password. Now there's a lot you can do with passwords. We're not adding a confirm password on here, but one of the things I've done before, I'm pretty sure, oh by the way, we're using min here to make sure that it's got a minimum of 6 characters. I should quickly point that out. One of the things I've done before, and I think you can do it quite easily in Join. I think I've done it in a code base before. You can pass in another field for confirm password, and then you can actually compare the password and the confirm password together and make sure that they're the same. And that's quite useful. I know a lot of websites obviously do confirm password, just to make sure you've got the right password, I guess. So that is something you can do in Joy. We're not going to be doing it now just to keep things simple, but at some point, if people are interested in that, I can go over it. So we'll just do the login schema now. So we've got joy.object, and then in this one we only need to pass in the email and the password. And there doesn't really need to be many checks on this because we're not actually storing anything in the database. So we don't need to make sure that well, actually, no, we could probably make sure that the email is a valid email. That's not too important because what we're going to be doing is using the email to find a user in the database. So it's not too important, although we could probably still do that. So if we do joy.string and then .email, and that should be fine. And then password, we don't really need to do the same checks as we did before, like making sure that it's got a minimum of 6 characters. So we'll just do required like that, because again, we're not storing anything, and we're just comparing the password with whatever's hashed in the database. Then we'll do export default, and we'll export both of these. And in our case, we are actually, like, I was trying to think, the token export for the, what was it for? Yeah, this is still kicking up a fuss, I don't know why. Hang on a minute, resources user.interface. Okay, there we go. So this one we obviously did the individual exports as well. In our validation, we are actually going to be using these in the same file, so there's probably no point actually doing individual exports. There's no real benefit to it in this case. So we'll just do this, we'll just export both of them in the same default export, and then we can use them basically like this. We do the validate.create. In our case, it'll be validate.login and validate.register. So now we will add the service code. So this service code will handle all the actual logic around basically creating a user and logging them in and stuff. So we'll do an import here, import user model from resources /user/ and then model. We'll import token from utils/token. Create a class called user service. And the first thing we'll do is, hang on a minute, put a space here. Create a private method, or not method, sorry, property called user, and pass in user model. Again, this is completely up to you because essentially this private user and user model are the exact same thing. I just like the way it looks when you do this.user. I think it looks better, but that's completely subjective, so you can use user model if you want. We'll do a comment here just to let any developers know what the function's actually doing, although in this case it'll be quite obvious, but we'll just do register a new user, and the function itself is going to be called register. That's why it's obvious. So we do public async register, and this is going to accept basically everything we need to create a user. So it's going to be name, and that's going to be a string. Email, and again that's going to be a string. Password, string, and then role, which is also going to be a string. Now we're going to hard code the role, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but yeah, we'll just hard code that role when we pass it in. We're not actually going to let the user submit a role, which is why it's not in the validation. So that's going to return a promise of either a string, which is going to be the token actually. We're returning the access token on this, the actual JSON web token that gets created, or an error if things go wrong. So this we'll do a try catch, and we'll do const user is equal to await this dot user dot create, and we'll pass in basically everything that we've passed through. So we'll do name, email, password, and role, and then we'll do const access token equal to token dot create token, and then we'll return access token, and then in the controller, hang on a minute, one argument, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. You have to pass in the user, because we're obviously using the user as part of the token creation, just to get the ID of the user so we can store it. And the error, we're going to throw a new error, and we'll do something like unable to create user, something like that. What you want to pass in is up to you. There we go, that's fine. We're going to do another function, and you probably guessed already, but this is going to be a login function, so we'll just put attempt to login a user. So we'll do public async login, scroll down a bit, and okay, that's fine. And in this case, we're only going to be passing in the email and the password, because that's all we need to log in a user. And then it's going to return either a string or an error. And we're essentially doing the same thing we did with register, except instead of creating a user, we're just trying to find the user. So what is wrong with this login? Function implementation is missing. Okay, it's fine. I think my thing's just lagging behind a little bit, so it's giving me errors that are actually, they've actually already been fixed. So yeah, that's just because we're not returning anything, I think. So if we do try catch again, and inside of the try, we'll do const user equals to, and then we'll do await this dot user dot find one, and we'll just pass in the email. So it's just going to find one by the email. And what we want to do is check that that user actually exists. So if it doesn't exist, we'll throw an error, and we'll say something like unable to find user with that email address. Okay, that should be fine. What have I done here? I'm getting a lot of errors here. Oh, okay. I know what I'm missing. Oh my god. Is that all I'm missing? Is that the only reason why it's... Yeah, okay. Is that fine? Yeah. So I missed the promise, and that just made the entire function just... Yeah, it just messed up. Right, so that's fine. Yeah, just make sure you put the promise there as well. Okay. So yeah, basically we're checking if the user exists. If it doesn't exist, we're going to pass through an error, and this is why in our controller we're actually going to use the errors that are passed through from this function, because they're more descriptive. So if the user doesn't exist, we'll pass through the error that it doesn't exist because there's no user with that email address. And then we're going to do if, and we're going to do an await inside this if, user dot is valid password. I'm going to pass in the password, and this will return a boolean. So if it's true, we want to return token dot create token, and we'll pass in the user so it can create the token. Otherwise, we're going to throw another error, and we're just going to say wrong credentials given. And then inside of this error, we're just going to say, we're going to be a bit more non-specific because we don't really know where it failed here. So we'll just say unable to login user or something along that. We could probably do something like wrong credentials given. We'll keep it as this for now, but yeah, that's probably as non-specific as we can get, I think, without being completely useless, I suppose. And then our final thing. Oh, that's it for now, actually. Yeah, that's it. I was going to say that you might have added one for actually getting the user, but I just remembered something that we're going to store the user in rec.user. So when we create the endpoint to get the user, we're just going to use whatever's in rec.user, essentially. Which reminds me, we need to create a type declaration, which is interesting. So, or a type definition. So inside of a folder called definitions, we're going to create a file called custom.d.ts. So custom.definition.ts. And what this is going to do is, so we're going to import user from @resources/user/interface. What this is going to do is add our user object to the Express interface, or the request interface that Express provides. The reason being is it'll throw errors otherwise, because it'll say something like, user doesn't exist on request, on type request. Obviously, we're adding user to the type request, so we kind of need to reflect that within the types. So we'll do namespace express. So declare global, namespace express, and then export interface request, and then we do user and user type user. So what this will do is it'll just add user to the request interface, which is really useful, and it stops a lot of problems. So otherwise we'll just get errors all over the place saying that, like, user doesn't exist. But we know that it does, so we need to reflect that here. And now that that's done, we can get on with creating the controller. So we'll import quite a lot of things, as usual. So router, request, response, and next function. I'm getting better at typing without looking at my keyboard, by the way. That's why I'm not doing too badly, but the mic is still in the way of my keyboard. The next thing we'll do is import controller from, and that'll be @utils interfaces controller interface, and we'll import HTTP exception from, and that's utils again. That'll be exceptions and http.exception. We'll import validation middleware. It actually knows what I want to type now based on, I guess, the other controller that I've got. So it knows what to do, which is quite useful. At middleware, @/middleware, sorry, and then validation middleware. We'll import, okay, maybe I'm not that good at typing. We'll import validate from, and that'll be @resources, user, and then validation. We'll import user service from @resources, user service. And what's wrong with this? Is it just telling me that it has no fault? Oh, good job I looked at that error. No default export. We forgot to do this. Default user user service. There we go. Okay, that should shut it up. Yeah, I keep forgetting to export stuff for some reason. The next thing we're going to import, it doesn't actually exist yet, which is quite common in these videos now, I think, that something doesn't exist that we're using. But we'll add it in a little bit. I think that'll be the last thing we add before we actually start testing our API. So it's going to be in @/middleware/authenticated.middleware. So this will be a new middleware we add just to check that the user exists, and then also attach the user to rec.user, so we can use it throughout the application. So we'll do class user controller implements controller, and we'll do public path is going to be equal to /users. The public router is going to be equal to router, and then we'll do private user service going to be equal to new user service. So we're just going to user service. So we're just going to instantiate that. That's fine. We'll add a constructor which will initialize the routes. So do this dot initialize. I spelled that wrong. Initialize routes. There we go. And then a private function for initialize routes, and that's going to return void. And we can add all the stuff now. So if we just do this dot router dot post, and this is going to be for register, so we'll do this dot path /register. So we're using string interpolation here to do this dot path /register, and we'll pass in the validation middleware, and we'll do validate dot register, and then the last thing we'll pass in this dot register, which will be the register function that we'll define in a little bit of time. This dot router dot post, and this will be for login. We'll do curly braces this dot path and /login. How you name your authentication routes is up to you. I think /users /register makes sense, although it could be like /auth maybe. But in the case, we're just going to use this path that we've defined up here. So we'll do validation middleware again, and that'll be validate dot login, and then this dot login, which will be the login function that we'll define in a little bit. And the last one is going to be a get request, this dot router dot get, and this will just be the path. So we'll do, I keep doing p instead of the curly braces, this dot path, and this will accept a middleware, the authenticated middleware, which we'll define in a little bit of time, and this dot get user, which again will be the function that we'll define in a little bit. So the first function we'll do is the register function. So we'll do private register, and that'll be equal to async, and it will accept rec, which will be request, res, which will be response, and next, which will be next function, and the return type promise, and that'll be either response or void, and then arrow function, and there we go. So we do a try catch, and we'll get all the values we need for the register function. So we do const name, email, and password, and we'll get these from rec.body. So then we'll do const token, and that's going to be equal to await this dot user service dot register, and that's going to accept name, email, password, and I mentioned earlier that we're going to hardcode the role. We'll just hardcode user, and the idea here is that anybody that uses this register endpoint will be a normal user, so we'll just pass in user here. If, let's say in the future, you have an admin dashboard and you want to add more admins, or like, more staff, something like that, you could create a separate endpoint that can only be accessed by admins, let's say, or whatever users are able to add users, and then you could pass in a role or something like that, so like admin or customer support or something like that. But for this one, we'll just hardcode user, because only users will, only people that are registering to become a user will use this endpoint. Well, that was a confusing sentence. And then we'll do res.status 201 to indicate that a resource has been created, and then we'll do JSON, and we'll just pass through the token. Depending on how you do it, you may not want to pass through a token, because essentially passing through a token will log them in as well. Depending on how you do it, you may just want to say that you may just want to send status essentially and say 201 that a user's been created, and then just leave it there, and then make them log in on the front end. It's up to you. It's sort of, from a user experience point of view, it's a bit annoying when you register and then have to log in again, essentially, because you've registered. You've already passed in your username and email and password and stuff, and then you have to do it again. So it's up to you how you handle that. For me personally, I just log them in instantly. But again, depends how you want to do it. Up to you. So if that all fails, we'll do a HTTP exception, and we will just use. So we'll do 400 as the error code, and we'll just use the message from the service essentially. So the service will tell us if something's gone wrong because of like an email, maybe an email already exists or something, in which case we'll pass that back through to the user. It's up to you how you do that. You could just send through just a message like unable to create user, something like that. But we'll just use error.message and then get a specific error message from the service. The next thing we'll do is create the login function or endpoint. So we do async rec request res response, and you know what might be good actually, if I could have something that like auto completes. So if I wanted to create like a function for an express endpoint, it would just automatically create all of this stuff essentially, just minus this part. It would just create like this for me. That would be quite useful, because they're essentially always the same, except this part in the middle is a bit different. That would be good. Just another idea that I might work on at some point in the future. Response or void as the return types, and then the arrow for the arrow function. And then we do a try catch. And this one is just going to be using email and password. And that's going to be, we're going to get that from rec.body. And then we'll do const token is equal to await this dot user service dot login, and we'll pass in the email and the password. And then we'll just do res.status, and we'll do 200 this time just to indicate that it's been successful. Nothing's technically been created besides the jsonwebtoken, which I don't think is enough to justify a 201 status. And then in the error, basically the same as what we did before, we'll do next new HTTP exception, and we'll just pass through, well, we'll do 400 and then pass through the error dot message. There we go. And last but not least, we'll do the get user function, which will just return the user. This is quite useful just generally, but specifically if you're using like some kind of single page application. I know a lot of them, every time a user goes onto a new page, they'll request the user again to make sure that it's always up to date. So this is quite useful for that. So we'll do request, res, response, next as usual. Not next function. Next function, and then the return type going to be either response or void. So a little bit different this time because we're not actually doing it in a try catch or anything like that. We're just returning the user essentially, or throwing an error. So what we want to do is check that the user actually exists. So if there's no user, we want to throw an error. We're going to do next. We'll do new HTTP exception. So we're not actually throwing the error, sorry. We're just doing next with a HTTP exception, similar to how we do it up here. And we'll do for or for in this case, and then something like no logged in user or user not found. It's up to you what you put there. And if we find something, we'll just do res.status 200. I think the default status is 200, so you don't technically need to do this. I'm just being very explicit. And we'll send, we'll do JSON, and we'll send through the rec.user, but we'll call it JSON. Or should we just call it user actually? User, rec.user. We're going to call it, I said we're going to call it JSON. I'm Jason. We're going to call it data, although in this case we're actually going to call it user. Just I think that makes more sense. Otherwise, I think if we just did this, oh yeah, it would fail because it doesn't understand the dot there. So user rec.body. Oh no, sorry, rec.user, not body. There we go. Okay, that's good. And then export default user controller. And there's one thing that we need to do. Besides create the authenticated middleware, we need to actually instantiate this controller here. So if we do import user controller, and that's going to be from at resources / user controller. There we go. And we'll just add it here. So we'll do new user controller and then just instantiate that. There we go. So that'll actually, when the app starts up, it will register these routes here, because it'll call the constructor, which will call initialize routes and then initialize these routes. That means we can actually use them. And then the last thing we need to do is create this new middleware. So if you go to your middleware folder and create authenticated.middleware.ts, and inside of here we've got a few things to import again. We've got import, and then we've got request, response, and next function, like I think pretty much every other file we've done so far. And that's going to be from express. Then we want token, so import token to get the functionality. I think verified token in this case we're going to be using. So we could just do this, I think, verify token, because I did say earlier that this is why we're exporting those functions separately so that we can do something like this. So we'll do verify token from at utils/token. That's fine. Import user model, and this will help check whether a user with that, I think it's the ID of that's stored in the JSON web token, if the user with that ID exists. So we'll get that from resources, user, and then user model. We'll do import, a very confusing one here, token again, but this time it's the interface. As I mentioned last time, oh, I spelled that wrong. From utils, I mentioned last time that you may want to name your interfaces with an I at the beginning of them. I know some people do that, but then some people say don't do that. Again, I don't know why. It's more about consistency when it comes to how you format your code and the sort of the naming conventions and stuff that you follow. If you do it throughout your code base, then it's usually fine. So if you want to do iToken, I usually just get it from context, depending on how I'm using it, because I'm only going to use an interface as a type, so I'll know that it's an interface. That might still be a bit confusing, but yeah, it works for me just fine. So it's up to you what you do with your naming convention. So we'll do utils, and we're going to get the HTTP exception. So we'll do exceptions / http.exception. And then the last but not least, import JWT from jsonwebtoken. There we go. So that's everything we need. We're only going to actually do one function, so it's quite a lot for one function, but it's a fairly big function. So we'll do async function, and we're going to call it Authenticated Middleware. There we go. And it's going to accept rec, which will be request. Res, which will be response. Next, which will be next function. And that's going to return a promise, either response or void. So the first thing we're going to do is get the bearer token. Now, I guess that's something I haven't mentioned yet, but the way we're going to store our JSON web token is in it's in the authorization header. So I'll just do this. So const bearer is going to be rec.headers, headers plural, and then authorization header. And we start it as a bearer token, which essentially just means that it's going to say bearer space and then the JSON web token. So we actually need to get the JSON web token from the authorization header. So we'll do if there's no bearer or the bearer doesn't start with, so we do bearer dot starts with, and then it's bearer and a space. Then we're going to throw an exception, and this is the reason why this. So we'll do. I'll not throw an exception. Sorry, we'll just return that it's unauthorized because it's not provided a token to us. So we'll do res dot status 401. Send. We can do JSON here again, and we'll do error, and we'll just pass through unauthorized. So as I was saying, the reason why this function's so big is because we have to just go through quite a few scenarios, about what could potentially go wrong. So like in this case, the bearer token hasn't been provided at all. So we need to say, okay, that it's going to be unauthenticated. So we'll just return unauthorized because we can assume that they're not going to be able to do anything if we're using this middleware. And the next thing we're going to do is actually get the access token. And we're just going to do bearer.split, and we're going to split it. Bearer space, and then we'll get the second element in the array, and we'll do trim just to make sure it's got no white space, and that should be fine. And then we'll do a try catch, and what we'll do is do const payload. And I'm going to specify the type here, so it's either going to be a token or JWT.JSON web token error, and that's going to be equal to await verify. Oh, did it wrong. Hang on. Verify token. There we go. And I'm going to pass in the access token. So what that's going to do, and we defined it earlier, but it's going to check that. it's going to check it against the secret that we created in here. So JWT secret, and it's going to check that we actually signed that token for starters, and then also check that that token hasn't expired. And if it passes both of those tests, it'll count it as a valid token. Otherwise, it will give us an error. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a check here to see if this payload is an instance of JWT.jsonwebtoken error. And if it is, then something's gone wrong. Hang on a minute, I'm not inside of the if statement. There we go. And we'll return, once again, we can basically copy and paste what we did up here. If that's an error, again, we'll just say that it's unauthorized and the user will have to try logging in again or something. And if we know that that's fine and that we actually got a valid token, then we can use that token to find the user. So we'll do await user model dot find by ID, and we'll pass in the payload ID. And we'll do a couple of more things. So we'll do select, and we'll do minus password. So what this will do is it'll get rid of the password. So it'll return all the other information about a user from the database, except the password, which is, as you can imagine, pretty important. And then we'll execute that. And then we'll do a check to see if that user exists. So this is another a potential scenario that the user doesn't actually exist with that payload ID. So we'll do if no user, this time, I'm not too sure why I've done that actually, because I've wrote it weirdly. So basically, what I've got here, and so return next, and it's going to be a new HTTP exception 401 unauthorized, which you might have already guessed why I'm a bit confused here. Have I spelled that right? Unauthorized. Okay. Yeah, so basically up here, for some bizarre reason, I've done return res.status 401, but then here I've done it as a HTTP exception, which probably makes a lot more sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of these ones here, and just use the HTTP exception, which would have made more sense right off the bat, but whatever, we'll go with it. Yeah, just use this HTTP exception. It essentially does the same thing. Yeah, that should be fine, I think. Yeah, that's okay. So if there is a user, we can set rec.user equal to user, and then we can return next. Because it's at the bottom of the function, we don't really need to add this return. So that's up to you if you add that. And once again, if all this fails, we'll just say that it was unauthorized. So yeah, I don't know why I was doing the res.status and stuff before. I could have just used the HTTP exception, but there we go. I'm basing some of this off of an older code base, which I've gone back and sort of rewritten a bit, but not fully. So yeah, that's why some of the things are a bit messed up. But it should be fine. And that looks like it, I think, for everything. This is still causing an error, but I think it's just because it doesn't realize that it does exist now. So if I do that, it should refresh it. And looks like that's fine. Oh, it has no default. I did it again. Hang on a minute. Ugh, I'm useless. Export default, and what did we call it? I won't make you type it out again. Just copy and paste it. There we go. Authenticated middleware. Oh god. I need to get a better mic setup. Back to user controller. Yeah, that seems to be fine. All right, so that's working. A lot of code, but yeah, that should be your login system done. You can, in the future, add other ways to log in as well, and I would recommend doing that. It makes it quite nice for the user to have like username and password as an option, but then like Google login or the magic email link I mentioned earlier, which is a pretty cool way of doing things. So I have some requests set up just to test if everything's working, so we need to actually run this. So if we do npm run dev, hopefully I don't get any weird issues like I did last time. We'll see. Oh, I actually did as well. User controller.ts. Okay, let me just figure what's going on here. Okay, so I figured out what the issue is, and it's what I expected it to be. If you look at the register function and the login function, and you look at the try catch, the error that gets passed through, it complains about it being object unknown, of type unknown, and to solve that you can just do the colon any again, which I think we did in the last video as well to solve an issue. Again, I'm not 100% sure what's happening. I think the problem is there's a slight version difference in TypeScript that I'm using for my old code base and this code base. So yeah, it's causing some issues. I'm gonna have to look into that and make sure I can bring them both up to date so that if anything goes wrong, I spot it before I even start making the video. But yeah, if you just add colon any and colon any, it's not really an issue in this case. Obviously, it's sort of frowned upon to add any because it sort of it removes the whole point of type checking and static type checking and whatnot. In this case, though, we know what it's going to be. We know that it's going to be an error. The only way it can get into this try catch is if it throws an error. So it's not too much of an issue. There's always going to be a message attached to it. So in this case, we can get away with it. But yeah, I'll have to look into it further to see what's actually causing this. But that should be fine. If we can look now and we're actually running it properly. And it seems to be working fine. But yeah, as I was saying, we have, or I've set up some requests in Insomnia to register and stuff. I think that a user will already exist with this email. So what I'll do is I'll just say example@test.com and I will send that request off. There we go. So it looks like it's registered the user and it's given us a token, which is good. Login is going to be the same. I'm going to have to change that to example. Oh. I copy the entire email, so we'll just do example@test.com with a really secure password, and we'll log the user in, and it gives us another token. So that's good. The last thing we need to do is check that we can actually get the user's information. As you can see, if we send a request without any authentication, without the bearer token added, it gives us status 401 unauthorized. If we go over to auth and we do bearer token and we add our token in here, which we got from our login request, we can do it again and it should, cannot read property trim of undefined, bear with me. Okay, so the issue was, and I don't know why I did this, I put a colon after bearer. There's actually no colon, it's just bearer and then a space. So we try again, we'll go back to here, try again, and there we go, we get our user. Yeah, sorry about that, once again, my spelling, and just adding like random symbols all over the place is a bit of me on the arse again. But there we go. That's working fine. And yeah, your login system should all be set up now and working. That's pretty much it. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, actually, if you had any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. If you have any recommendations about what topics you want me to cover in the future, let me know. But yeah, other than that, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.